Young Wolf Media.
Hi and welcome to Young Wolf Media. I hope everyone's doing well, and today we're going to talk about the Irish housing crisis. The housing crisis is happening all over Ireland, indeed all across the world. But for this video I'm going to concentrate in Dublin and the Greater Dublin area. Dublin is a great example to use because it's a microcosm of the economic situation across the cities of Ireland and indeed the rest of the world. Because Ireland is an open economy and it depends on trade from across the world, so what this means in real terms is, for example, what happens, say, in New York, like for example the subprime mortgage crisis, is going to have a trickle down to the Irish economy because it's an open economy. Now, the two main factors for the housing crisis are shortages of housing and low wages. Now, for a few of my examples, I would use American statistics as they're easier to find and they'll still explain what's happening in Ireland. Wages in real terms have been falling since the 1960s, despite workers being more productive across the world. You may be thinking, well, I'm getting paid more than my parents were 20 years ago. Don't worry, I'm going to explain it to you. Real wages means income expressed in terms of purchasing power as opposed to actual money received. So basically, this means what you can actually buy with your money. Now, there are various reasons why this has happened, but one of the simple factors is simply companies have been increasing their wages in line with inflation, e.g. increasing wages in real terms. For example, from 1973 to 2017, hourly compensation for a typical worker rose just 9%, while productivity increased 74%. Now I'm going to give you an example to explain real wages in real terms. A married couple in the 1960s in the USA. Now firstly I should point out the wife is a homemaker, so she does not work. The husband earns $2 an hour, which doesn't sound like a lot. He makes $80 a week and he works 40 hours a week, so he earns $3,840 a year. However, house prices are only $2,000 in his area, so his house is only a little over half a year's wages. Now let's go to 2019. We have a married couple who both earn $50,000 a year, which is $100,000 altogether. Now they're looking to buy the same house that was bought for $2,000 in the 1960s. However, the cost of the house is now $450,000. Now you're thinking, well, that's fine. They have two incomes and their wages are a lot higher than a measly $3,840 a year. Now, the same house costs 4.5 times their yearly wage compared to a half a year's wage in the 1960s. In real terms, the cost is 4 times the amount that it was in the 1960s, despite their wages being bigger. Now, there are some factors worth pointing out here. First of all, the couple in 2019 would have probably had to go to college to get a wage this high, which means they would have had college debt. And also, there's another factor that I need to talk about. We haven't compared the couples in the exact same factors, e.g. where only one person is working in the marriage. Now the couple from 2019, if only one of them was working, this would mean a salary of $50,000, which means the house would cost 9 times their yearly salary, and in real terms the house would cost 8.5 times more in real terms compared to the 1960s. So next time you hear elderly relatives saying, well, I only got paid €2 an hour, just think of this example. Where before you would think, oh, €2, that would barely buy me a can of Coke. Now you know that it's not about the amount of money, it's about what you get for your money. Now we're going to talk about first time buyers who are aged 23 to 38, also known as Generation Y. Generation Y are increasingly concerned with the developments of their careers. Now this frustrates employers because they're thinking, why are my employees in such a rush to progress? However, the employers don't understand, like I've explained to you, that in real terms, wages have fallen, and this is the reason for this. Now, the economic prospects for this generation have greatly declined, largely due to the Great Recession in the late 2000s. Therefore, many people of this generation are now just playing catch-up. Generation Y have benefited least from the economic recovery following the Great Recession, as their average incomes for this generation has fallen twice the rate of the general adult population, and this generation are likely to be on the path towards lower incomes for at least another decade. Now there's an interesting quote I'm going to read for you. I found it from Bloomberg.com. 3.5 years after the worst recession since the Great Depression, the earnings and employment gap between those under 35 and their parents and grandparents threatens to unravel the American dream, for each generation doing better than the last. The nation's younger workers have benefited least from the economic recovery that has been the most uneven in recent history, Generation Y are expected to be poorer than previous generations. The reason that this generation will be poor, as I've already talked about, the rising cost of housing, both buying and renting, and then in real terms their wages have been falling. Where for a previous generation they could raise a family working an unskilled job, such as working in retail, without the wife working, and were able to buy an affordable house on one income, which would be unthinkable for the average person today. Now for Dublin there are a number of reasons why houses are so expensive to buy and rent. Firstly, there was no new houses built during the recession. There has been no significant social housing built by the government in the last few years, and poor government planning, which has led to an urban sprawl and a lack of decentralisation, which means people from Mayo, Cork, Kerry have to come to Dublin for work, which makes the housing situation much worse. Now, to show you how bad it is, I'm just going to give you a statistic. In the Greater Dublin area, over 42% of the working population is employed in Dublin. Now, this is way out of whack for a normal country. For example, our nearest neighbours, the UK, only 15% of their total population works in their capital, London. Now, this is a staggering 27% less. Now, if the government were able to do a lot more decentralisation and got only 20% of the workforce working in Dublin, rent and house prices would be significantly cheaper in all areas of Dublin. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how can the average person in Dublin afford to buy a house? And the short answer is no, they can't. As the UN said, housing in Ireland is unaffordable. But for the long answer, I'm going to do the numbers. I estimate that less than 10% of first-time buyers without any help from parents or inheritance could afford to buy a house in Dublin. The average person or couple looking to buy a house in Dublin would have to make 100,000. Now, 100,000 may not sound like a lot to you if you come from a country with high-paying wages. However, only 5% of the tax-paying population in Ireland have a salary of 100,000 or greater, and these wages are heavily taxed. Now, you may be thinking, oh, well, if a couple both make 50,000, then they'll be able to buy a house. It's very unlikely that a couple would be on this amount. Plus, when you factor in if they start having children, one parent is going to have to stop working or working less, which will cut their wages. Now, revenue of the Irish Government Agency responsible for taxation related to matters in Ireland shows that 75% of all income earners earned less than 40,000, and the median wage for the average worker in Ireland is just 29,000. So the likelihood of having two workers both on 50,000 is very unlikely. Now you may be thinking, why would people need 100,000 to buy a house in Dublin? Well, the reason for this is the mortgage lending rules in Ireland, which means you can only mortgage 3.5 times your income. The median house price in Dublin now stands at over 380,000. In this example, it would give you a mortgage of 350,000. So even on a high wage, you would struggle to find a house in Dublin. Of course, some of you who may not be familiar with Dublin may be thinking, well, you can rent. Dublin has one of the highest costs of rents in the world at this current time. Of course, this situation can change. The average Dubliner now spends 55% of their wages on rent. The average citizen in Dublin is paying astronomical rent, which means not only are people paying rent so high that they have no chance of buying a house, this means that the average Irish citizen will have to be given higher wages to afford the luxury of paying rent and nothing else. This in turn will make Ireland less attractive for foreign investment, which means less jobs. And for indigenous businesses, this means that they'll be less profitable because of such high wages. So they'll hire less people, which means less jobs. And you better believe this will affect small to medium businesses, as some of these businesses will not be financially viable due to the cost. Overall, this will create a vicious cycle that will affect the whole economy, that will drive the country into a recession, which could be much worse than Ireland has ever faced before. You may be thinking, what can we as a country do about it? Well, there's a lot of different solutions, which I can do a separate video on it. But for now, I'm just going to give a few examples. We need to start realising that houses are not a commodity, but they are the vital part of our infrastructure. And it's one of the major ways in which keeps us competitive on a global scale. The government will need to put in place policies that make this so, such as in Switzerland, where they have laws in place that makes it harder to buy second homes. This policy helps to keep the houses in Switzerland affordable for the average citizen. In fact, it's worked so well. In Switzerland, the capital, Zurich, has cheaper rent than Dublin. That's despite the fact that the average Zurich citizen is getting paid more than twice as much as their Dublin counterparts on average. We can also look to other small countries like New Zealand, who have banned most foreigners from buying homes to cool down their property market. The average Irish citizen is limited to a loan of 3.5 times their annual income. This same limit or similar limit should apply to property developers. This will make an equal playing field that will help to cool down the market, and this will stop property developers outbidding the average Irish citizen. This could lead the way for the average citizen setting up a non-profit co-op where they could build their own homes, as they're no longer competing against the big boys in an unfair game. Along with putting on these restrictions, it will make social housing cheaper, as there won't be bidding wars for the land, which we currently have with the over-leveraged developers. I hope this video shows you, and hopefully the Irish government, that leaving housing to developers and the free market could be very dangerous for Ireland in the long term, for the reasons stated above. Even looking back to our own history, when Sean Lemass, arguably the best Taoiseach we've ever had. For those of you outside of Ireland, Taoiseach just means Prime Minister. And Sean Lemass helped to transform Ireland's economy in a number of ways, but most important is he invested in Ireland's infrastructure. And this is what helped transform Ireland from a backward nation into a modern European city. And this current government will need to tackle the housing problem by decentralising the Irish economy, building more social housing and having better plans for building houses in order to make the economy stronger for the long term, which will help to make Ireland better for the average citizen. Now, the housing crisis not only has the economical factors which I've talked about, but also the human factors, such as Ireland having record-breaking numbers of people homeless. The housing crisis has helped to kill creativity, as people can't afford to start businesses as the rent is so high. The mental health costs have been huge. For example, 1 in 5 adults in the UK suffer from mental health problems due to housing pressures, and I would say this is pretty similar to Ireland as well. Now, I don't want to end this gloomy, and I will end it with this. On the bright side, Ireland can't solve these problems, as I outlined earlier, and Ireland can be made a better place to live for the average Irish citizen. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a good day. If you want, please like, comment and subscribe, and see you next time on Young Wolf Media. Thanks.